Resistance. Resistance is the war every artist must face. Resistance is the war we all must face. It is the battle that must be won to achieve success. Overcoming resistance is what turns the amateur into a professional. Resistance takes many forms and fashions its way into our weaknesses. It knows exactly how to stop you. It knows just how to make sure you fail, give up, miserable and alone. Resistance is what keeps most people from ever realizing their full potential. Steven Pressfield spent the first part of his life losing that war to resistance, failing all along the way. Lost, aimless, and hopeless at times, resistance had his number. The amount of pain and suffering that he endured, I find unfathomable. Why and how he was able to persevere through rejection after rejection is something I can't understand. But endure he did. And in the end, not only did he achieve his goal of becoming a distinguished author and novelist, he wrote The War of Art, his first nonfiction work published specifically for authors and artists. This Bible for creatives has gone on to influence and shape some of the greatest writers alive today. The impact that this and follow-up works like Do the Work and Turning Pro have become gospel for those looking to realize their dreams and ambitions. While he directly appeals to the artist, or more specifically the writer, the message and process for overcoming resistance applies to anyone with a vision or mission. The principles all work. Along with his influential nonfiction, Steven's novels also dive into a code of values through the Spartan principles of ancient times. These stories encapsulate the warrior ethos while giving great perspectives into the lives of those who endured resistance centuries ago. The most recent novel, A Man at Arms, does a magnificent job of this. After reading all that those ancient people had to go through, you realize that the resistance and challenges that we now face may not be so bad. And maybe that's really the point. Perspective. Perspective makes any resistance manageable, something that can be overcome, a war that can be won. And Steven Pressfield shows us the way. Learn how with The Man at Arms, a warrior artist, Mr. Steven Pressfield.
This episode is brought to you by Atlantic Custom Group. Atlantic Custom Group specializes in the unique and inspiring. For all your home repair and improvement needs, from custom libraries and millwork to tree houses and off-grid structures, Atlantic Custom Group can do it all. Renovate your kitchen, remodel your basement, or reinvent your entire home with Atlantic Custom Group. Call now for an appointment, 770-827-7591. Atlantic Custom Group, official sponsor of the Extraordinary Podcast.
This is the Extraordinary Podcast, and my guest today is Steven Pressfield.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's great to be here on the Extraordinary Podcast.
You have no idea how hard it is for me to not fanboy out right now. And the only reason I'm going to do it just a little bit is because as I was preparing for this interview, you've been on so many other podcasts and been with people I admire like Ryan Holiday and Rich Roll. I was listening to your podcast with Tim Ferriss, and to watch each one of those guys who I respect so much fanboy out on you and it just kind of geek out a little bit. It's just, so I feel like, hey, well, if they can do that, then I can get away with at least a little bit of that. So let me just start off right by saying, like them, the War of Art has absolutely changed my life and my perspective on things. And to hear you say that you wrote that in literally 2 months, as you were saying on Rich's podcast, it just absolutely blew me away. But yeah, so thank you for all of your contributions, I guess.
All right. Thanks, Nate. I'm delighted that the War of Art struck a chord with you.
So I'm curious, everybody knows so much about you for like the last, let's say 20 years that you've kind of been in the spotlight, but you've had such a dynamic life leading up to, I'll call it the time that you kind of became, let's say, quote unquote, rich and famous. You've done, like, you were a school teacher, picking fruit. I mean, doing all these different crazy jobs, driving a truck. Of all of those different jobs that you had, which one had the biggest impact on you, and which one had the biggest impact on your writing?
It's a great question. Nobody's ever asked me that question before. And I know you're kind of like me. You've been done a lot of, jobs that people might not expect you to do. I think definitely the one that had the biggest impact on me was driving tractor trailers, just, I'm not even sure why, just that it was kind of a dream of mine that I always wanted to do. And, and that it was as hard as it was, to learn. And also that it's a job where, uh, there's a tremendous amount of responsibility. You can screw up at any moment and kill yourself and kill a lot of other people, and even short of that, you can create a lot of damage, a lot of financial damage, if you just have a lapse of concentration, which was sort of one of my demons was being really irresponsible and not being able to finish anything and not being able to, somebody might give me an assignment or I give myself an assignment. I just screw it up. I was just, it was like a sick thing. I mean, it wasn't like I just sort of had a lapse like anybody else would have. It was like, it was a demon of mine, trying to sabotage me, which is really what the war of art is all about resistance and that kind of thing. So that was definitely the drive-in trucks was definitely the most important to me, also because it was in an environment where I was working for a boss that I really respected, who took a chance hiring me. And I also had a bunch of other drivers that I really looked up to and respected. And I didn't want to embarrass myself in front of them. So there was a lot of pressure, peer pressure on me to get it together. So that had a big effect on me and a big effect on my writing, because it sort of, it was a step on the way to really thinking of myself as a professional. I certainly didn't achieve it there. I screwed that one up and screwed a bunch of others after that, but at least sort of the seeds were planted of professionalism.
That's brilliant. Well, that's a perfect segue into my next question. I've got a buddy, Jeremy Gilbertson, and he's put together a writing program called Write to Know You, and it's kind of inspired by you. And he's actually the one who introduced me to you. So I was asking him about some of the things that we would talk about on the podcast. And I don't want this to become a war of art podcast, because you cover that so much, and there's so much of that out there for everybody to go enjoy that. And quite honestly, when I was going to prepare for this, I realized I gave my last copy of it away, so I couldn't even go back to my notes to even do that. But he talks about resistance, and that's such a big theme of that book. And he wanted to know, was that the first time that you encountered that and realized that true resistance for what it was?
That was not the first time. In fact, I didn't really get it then. It still hadn't sunk in. All I knew was that I had this tendency to sabotage myself, and I was just trying to fight it. And I didn't know, I thought I was crazy, or I had, something wrong with me. I certainly never thought, oh, this is a universal thing that everybody deals with. That really came later, when I worked for about 10 years as a screenwriter, where before I started actually writing books, and just kind of confronting this thing on a day-to-day basis, that sort of really made it very clear to me that there was a negative force, and that was defeating me constantly. And when I finally sort of gave it a name for myself and just called it resistance with a capital R, that was when it really became clear in my mind.
That's interesting, because for me, it was kind of the similar situation where, as I was over the last decade, I was doing a lot of the principles and concepts that I'm now talking about, and doing them made a lot of sense. And then they became habits, and I don't want to say natural or easy, but it was habit forming. But then once I started talking about it, and once I started trying to flesh it out on paper, like what you did with writing out the actual War of Art and writing that manual as a guide for people, that's when it became difficult for me. And that's even like putting it, like I lost some of the practices that I had put into place once I started talking about it and writing about it.
Really?
I found it really weird.
The exact opposite.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say that's when he really got a hold of it.
No, it started slipping. I was like, well, whoa. So like I even backed off and was like, okay, let's go back to the principles. Forget about writing them. And
why do you think that was, Nate? Why do you think you fell back?
I don't know. I think it's this resistance thing that you were talking about. That for me, it's I'm wondering if it was me subconsciously needing to hone the concepts, because the 8 Keys to Great started off as just personal development concepts. All these ideas were just best practices, and there's nothing new to that. We all know the Tony Robbins of the world already have these concepts pretty well mastered, but it was how I was presenting them. And so that's when the idea kind of came together of the construction and and what my background is, what I understand, to then, but even still there, like I mean, I had hoped for this book to be done by now, and it's still got a lot left to go. So,
because I found sort of like there's a difference between what I would call passive knowledge and active knowledge. Like when it's passive, it's like sort of you were saying, well, you sort of were applying the principles, you kind of knew what it was. But when you have to sort of teach it or write about it, then it goes from the back of your brain to the front of your brain. You go, oh, and for me, that really helps solidify it for me to kind of put it down in words and I go, oh, that's what I'm talking about,
Yeah, it's been a fun, but I'll tell you what the neatest part about it is the journey and enjoying the ride along the way. And that's where I'm at right now with the book, is wanting to include those experiences and stories into the content, into the meat and potatoes, so that everything kind of has a flow and there's some good examples, and it's hopefully, maybe a little bit inspiring or motivating along the way, because that's really what the end game is anyway.
That sounds good to me. Like, it's okay.
So you talked about screenwriting, and that's kind of where you really kind of made your bones as a writer, I feel like, or at least established yourself before hitting Bagger Vance and then really jumping into jumping into fiction. What is the easiest for you of the three, nonfiction, fiction versus screenwriting, and which one do you enjoy the most?
Great questions. It's a little tricky. In a way, the easiest, I think, is that nonfiction is like writing something like The War of Art. But the only reason it's easy was because I thought about it so much that by the time I actually came to write it, it was just like writing a grocery list. You knew it. You didn't have to struggle with it. In terms of between the other two, between screenwriting and fiction, screenwriting is a lot of fun because the medium, you can't get inside a character's head. Like you can in a novel. You can't just sort of do an interior monologue, where a character explains, you're inside their head. In a movie, the only way you can tell what a character is thinking is by what they say or what they do, right? Unless you do a voiceover, which is really lame. But I'm probably answering this too long, Nate. But,
no, this is brilliant.
But the thing about screenwriting is just the way the industry works. The screenwriter is a low man on the totem pole, or woman, and you get screwed and kicked and screwed over constantly. So I'm glad I'm out of it, because it's a terrible racket in terms of what they do to you. I mean, a classic thing that happens to a screenwriter is you might initiate a project and write a screenplay on spec, sell it, and the first thing they do is they fire you. I mean, you're immediately kicked out because the director wants to make the movie his own or her own. So it's really rough. And if they don't fire you, or they fire you and they replace you, with another writer, and then a lot of times they don't even tell you. You find out by reading about it in the paper. So it's the screenwriter is like the real whipping boy.
Whereas seems to kind of be a theme in Hollywood, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is a theme.
And for what you're in California, I've got some family out there, and they're in the industry a little bit as well. But we just found out that they're going to get to move to Georgia, so we're really excited about that.
Oh, great, great.
So what I want to talk a little bit more about the writing and writing nonfiction versus fiction, because again, like I have this nonfiction book, My 8 Keys to Great, that's going to be the first one down the road. But like, I think the theme of this podcast is telling stories, and I feel like I have these stories to share, and I want to share principles through a fiction format. So how did you go about? I'm really particularly interested in your Spartan themed books, you know, with all like Gates of Fire and obviously now with the Men at Arms, you've got these incredible characters that are exemplifying these principles. So like, how do you go about writing a story that then encapsulates a lot of, like, I want to write a story that shares all of the principles that Jordan Peterson has in his 12 rules for life, for example. Like, how do you go about figuring out that storyline to still cover that information?
Well, that's another great question, Nate. And certainly, I think when I'm writing a story like Gates of Fire, I'm not thinking about principles at all. I'm not trying to impart principles. I'm just trying to tell a story, and and to make it exciting and to make to hook the reader and get the reader into it and tell an exciting story. And it's only later that I might say to myself, what is this damn thing about? Is there an underlying principle here? Is there a theme to it? But I'm definitely not starting from the principles and then getting to the story. Now, on the other hand, when I was writing The War of Art, I put in, certain personal stories, right? And they were almost always about failures that I had, and when I was working with my editor, Sean Coyne, who's my partner in this, I said, I should cut those stories about myself. They're not really about, and he said, no, 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 no. He said, we want more of those stories,
For sure.
But they're really, and I think people do love, this is just a hint to you, Nate. People love to read stories where you screw up or where you get screwed. They don't want to hear stories about you succeeding, because we all are screwing up. And so we love to hear the writer of a book admit that he doesn't know all the answers either. But then those stories were really, I was starting with a point, like, in a chapter, I wanted to make a certain point, and then to illustrate it, I'd say, and here's what happened to me on the da-da-da-da. But I wasn't like in The War of Art, not writing an overall story at all. It was a straight nonfiction book.
Well, then I should be in great shape because one of the themes of this show is failing your way forward. And one of the questions I ask all my guests is, what's your favorite failure? So do you have a favorite failure?
There are so many, it's hard to know, but
you and me both, brother.
I'll just tell you one for whatever it's worth. I had written, this was kind of early in I say early, I was still like 36 years old or something. And I'd written like 3 novels that I could never find a publisher for. They were just total failures. Even my own mother wouldn't read them, And the last one, I'd spent 2 years, saved my money for 2 years, wrote this thing in New York. I'm driving a cab, and it just totally bombed. Nobody would buy it. My friends wouldn't read it. And I was really sort of at the point of like hanging myself, basically. And I thought, because I'd done it like 2 times before, this is the 3rd one. And I said to myself, I haven't got the guts to do this again, knowing that it's gonna fail again. But then that's when I had the thought, why don't I go to Hollywood and try to write for the movies? And I did. And that was a big plus for me, because like you say, I sort of made my bones out there. So that was a failure that turned into a success at the last minute.
I love it. That's amazing. Well, that brings up another great question. So of all your books, my favorite title of them all is that nobody wants to read your shit. That to me just is the epitome of like where I'm at in life. And when I saw that, I'm like, yeah, that's the next one on the list. I got to go read. But it's true, because nobody, I mean, like when you're first doing this, it feels like a lonely thing, and it feels like you're really putting yourself out there. And I feel like maybe one of the reasons why I haven't gotten the 8 Keys to Great book out there yet is because I don't have much of an audience yet. I don't have many people out there. So maybe it's not ready to be out there until I've got more people to receive it. I don't know. I don't know what the holdup is, but I'm definitely feeling that resistance. Maybe, for sure.
It is good these days, that it's like these days in publishing, the first thing an editor will ask you is, how many followers do you have? Or what kind of presence do you have on social media, right? because they're looking at the bottom line, right? Somebody comes in, they say, I got 300,000 followers. They go, we don't even care what your book's about. We'll publish it, right? If you have like 20 followers, that you could give them War and Peace and they're not going to take, so.
That's my problem. Well, that in fact, I don't have War and Peace in me either. but that's all right. So, well, because the reason why I wanted to ask you about the applying the nonfiction or a lot of these principles to fiction books is because, like with Bagger Vance right out of the gate, it was kind of like you had this kind of like guy giving advice and counsel and kind of helping this guy figure out his way. And then even now with like some of the warrior archetype stuff, it's like you're using this Spartan character to, or these characters to represent these different values and stuff. And to me, I think it's so great because it's like I'm always about these values being promoted, and it just seems like it's getting harder and harder, and there's less and less of these values being promoted. So whatever way it can be broadcast and made appealing to an audience, I'm like, we need more of that,
That's true. And it's tricky to do it in a story because if it can be kind of lame if it's obviously,
if it's contrived,
created this character to embody yeah. But it can be done. It just has to be done well.
So where did you grow up as a kid?
In the suburbs of New York City.
Kidding.
On Long Island and then up north of the city. My dad used to commute into the city to work.
What did your dad do for a living?
He was in real estate management in New York City. He worked for a company that like people who owned apartment buildings would hire his company to manage them. So like if you were living in that building and it was 10 below zero and the heat went out, you'd call my dad. He'd say, where the hell is the heat? And then he'd have to
go call the guy, get out there and make it happen. Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty cool. So what was one of your favorite memories growing up as a kid?
See if I can think of one. I just, I grew up, people don't even know what this is anymore, but I grew up as a caddy, carrying golf bags at, like the movie Caddyshack.
Yeah.
And that was another kind of great learning experience, where you're sort of the slave of somebody, but at the same time, you're offering kind of expert wisdom, so, and it was a whole interesting thing to grow up that way. Cause like mine, I'll tell you my nicknames in the Caddyshack, which is what the caddy master would call me. When I started out at 11, I was Shorty. Then I became Peanuts. Then I had a growth spurt and I became Legs. And then I became Stretch. And then after that, I got a job in the Caddyshack as the assistant caddy master in the pro shop. And I was always swinging golf clubs. So I became Sam after Sam Snead. So you sort of grew up through the whole thing. So that was a great education as a kid.
That is awesome. That's a little gem that's going to be strictly for this podcast. That's fantastic. Well, I find that so fascinating because number one, you have this amazing work ethic and this ability to continue to see things through. But again, like it just seems so relatable to me. This, I don't want to say blue collar kind of mentality, but like this, having done so many different things, like that's been such a common theme for my life, is like having all these different jobs and all these different experiences. And I find all of that, like I'm able to draw on each one of those experiences in some way from what's going on in my life or whatever situation I'm dealing with. And I feel like it makes me so much more well-rounded as a person.
Yeah, I agree completely, Nate. I feel like when you're working these blue collar jobs, whatever it is, you always have a boss, right? If you're laying bricks, there's a guy that's in charge of the whole bricklaying thing, right? And you're always, at least I am, you're always the idiot that doesn't know what he's doing, right? And so the great thing about these bosses is they become mentors to you, and you learn from one, you learn from another, and you model yourself after them. Like, I don't know, do you know who Joe DeCina is of the Spartan race? He was being interviewed by Rich Roll on Rich Roll's podcast. And he talked about when he was a kid, he started his own business cleaning swimming pools. He was cleaning a swimming pool for a guy that was a mafia guy. It was like in New Jersey, and the guy said to him, kid, he said, I'm going to tell you three things. He said, you're supposed to be here at 8 in the morning. Get here at 15 minutes of 8 every time. And he said, never ask me for money. He said, I'll pay you, don't, you know what I mean? I'll pay you what you're worth. And I can't forget what the third thing was, but it was another one of those kind of blue collar,
Do the job right.
keep your mouth shut, do it right. And your boss will take care of you. If the boss is a good guy, they get it right away and they'll take care of you.
Yeah, it's funny for me. I've been on both sides. There's been so many times where I've been the idiot and somebody's had grace on me. I've had a boss be so kind to me and understanding, but then I've also, over the years running my own business, been that boss that's had to take the guy under his wing. And one of the things I always like to think about is whatever that guy makes a mistake, whatever it is, and the more expensive ones, especially, never fire that guy, because if you stick with that guy through that situation and see it through and understand the situation, whatever, you just got an employee for life. That guy is going to go to bat for you every chance that he gets. You're going to have somebody who's loyal, who's going to go the extra mile. And it's like, if you can kind of have that mentality about it, then the example that was brought up to me was a guy broke like $100,000 piece of equipment and they had to replace it. It was ruined. So it cost him $100,000. He said, well, I just got $100,000 investment in this guy right here, because he's never going to screw that thing up again. He's going to bend over backwards to make sure the job's done right. And, it's like, it was an investment at the end of the day. So
that's a great one. I never heard that, Nate. I think that's really true. That's a real piece of wisdom. When you're a boss, when you're supervising people, you can tell the good ones right away, right? Just like the opposite of what Joe DeCina said, the guy that shows up early, a guy that doesn't go after you for money. And those are the guys or gals that you want to help. You immediately want to, this is I got to hang on to this person. And you just altruistically want to teach them, So it's something to keep in mind if you're the employee, to be a hard worker and don't screw around.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's always been a theme for me. It's become a theme for this show, and whatever business I've had the opportunity to lead a lot of people in other situations. And that's certainly something I'm always trying to promote. And I have these grand aspirations of writing and following down the path of you and Ryan Holiday and Tim Ferriss and all these guys are doing all these amazing things. Since you're like the guru to even those guys, what advice or counsel would you give to me as far as trying to reach my goals and establish the things I'm trying to do?
That's first of all, I would say, Nate, it's clear that you've got the passion for it. So that's a great thing right from the start, And
passion I got. Smarts, I'm not so sure. The rest of it might be lacking.
The smarts too.
The content might be lacking.
You've got a concept here of the 8 steps. I would just say that it takes time. You've sort of got to build a following, and I would just copy people that do certain things. Like Ryan Holiday, copy everything that he does.
How can somebody that young be that smart? I just can't believe it.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? I don't know how he does it.
That trust me, I'm lying. I mean, I read all of his Stoic stuff, and that's how I found him, was through all the Stoic principle stuff. Obstacles the way obviously is a huge one for me. But then when I read Trust Me, I'm Lying, it just was like, it blew me away. I didn't know. I could not. It made so like I understood at this meta level that I'd never understood things before. It was crazy.
Yeah, it's great. It was a great one. Yeah.
But I didn't mean to get off subject there.
Just copy the people who are doing it,
well, that's what I'm doing. So hopefully it's exactly what I'm doing. So.
And that's what I do. I'm a big believer in stealing from anybody I possibly can. If it's a good
I say it all the time.
Yeah.
I say it all the time. So tell me about your girlfriend's birds. I'm just curious, because you have a household that looks like, I have a house full of kids and it's wild and crazy and things around here, but you have a household looks like full of birds that could be wild and crazy as well. So tell me about that.
Well, we do. Well, my girlfriend, she's right out the window right now.
Is she out there playing with them?
And she's no, but we got a million birds around here. She's feeding them. And we got like a flock of about 40 parrots that come each day.
Oh, so those are wild?
Yeah, they're wild. It's actually a crazy thing around here in Southern California.
Whoa.
There's sort of a legend that it was like maybe two parrots escaped from a pet store, and the next thing you know, there were like 10,000 of them living
No.
wild in Pasadena. So there are these, these parrots, and of course they're noisy and they shit all over everything, but they're cute.
That's hilarious. Well, I just assumed because there were so many that they were like yours. Like I figured y'all like had a little bird rescue sanctuary or something. That's hilarious.
Yeah, no. It's just
Oh, that's great. Well, your girlfriend has been an absolute treat. She's been so kind and generous and with her time and helping me and us getting these things lined up. Kudos to her for all the behind the scenes things that she's doing.
I will thank her for that. Yeah, she's great. Diana.
Yeah, she's such an asset. I didn't know if you want to put her name out there or not. So, but yeah. She's God bless her and all that she's done for us and for the show and getting everything to us and setting up all the details, all that great stuff. But awesome stuff. We obviously, you have a purpose for being here. Let's briefly talk about A Man at Arms, the new fiction book that you have out that's been such a big success.
Well, we can do it really, really, really quick, Nate, because I know people are not here for that. This is a new fiction book for anybody who's read any of my ancient world stuff like Gates of Fire. This is all set in the ancient world. It's kind of a sort of a Western of the ancient world, like a samurai movie. And that's all I'll say. It's good. Check it out. That's all. I won't do any more of a pitch for it.
Well, for what it's worth, I have been promoting it and pitching it on the podcast and on social media because I think it's great.
Thank you.
Or what caught me off guard about it was how much of the perspective came from the boy David. Yeah. I was expecting all of the perspectives to be from Telamon or from the little girl, but when it was a lot of it, especially at the very beginning, it's like it's really focused on like how he's seeing everything from the outsider's perspective looking in. That caught me off guard. That was really cool.
Well, to give you a little bit of inside baseball in terms of that was definitely very deliberate. And the reason was that I wanted to, you remember I was talking about a movie earlier where I said that in a movie, as opposed to fiction, you can't go inside a character's head, right? If it's Clint Eastwood as the man with no name, the only way you know who he is or what he's thinking is by what he says or what he does. You never get to go inside his head. So that was what I wanted to do with the main character, Telamon. I wanted the reader to only know him from externals, by what he says and what he does. So that was why I had the book sort of seen through this young boy's eyes. And the young boy doesn't really understand this guy, this Telamon, this kind of gunslinger of the ancient world. He doesn't understand why he does what he does. And that's the way I wanted it, because I wanted to keep the reader guessing and keep the reader interested. What's this guy going to do next? And what is he thinking?
Well, yeah, it kind of keeps that level of mystery going for sure. That makes him that makes the character so appealing.
Pick that up. You're the first person that's picked that up.
Huh. Awesome. That just made my day. Well, so let's and you've got the warrior archetype series that people can find on social media. So real quickly, tell everybody where they can find you, tell them about your social media stuff, and they can learn more about some of those characters and principles.
All right. I'm on Instagram at Steven_Pressfield. There's only one of me. And there's I did this 50-part series called The Warrior Archetype that you can find there or on YouTube. And I'm doing another one called about the hero's journey right now, just starting it. And then I have a website that's just my name, Steven Pressfield, and that'll take you anywhere. There's a lot of stuff on there.
Yeah, the amazing website, by the way. I loved it. And even like how you handled your bio info and the way that you give your background, I found very appealing. Instead of just that lock, stock, and barrel stuff, that people normally throw out there. It's something I struggled with on my own website. And so to see you handle it the way that you did, I thought was really cool.
Well, feel free to steal it, Nate. We've got very similar backgrounds. Feel free.
Well, on that note of stealing, it's a theme for this show that I steal. And one of the people I steal from quite regularly is Tim Ferriss. and you've been on his podcast.
Uh-huh.
So I don't recall your answers to these questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and ask you because I ask all my guests. But two of the questions I like to wrap up with
Okay.
are if you had your billboard for all the world to see, what would you put on it? Straight off a Tim Ferriss show. And then his question I really like a lot is what's your one item under $100 that you use on an everyday basis that you could not live without?
Well, that's an interesting question. The first one about the billboard, actually, I hate billboards, so I would not have a billboard. And also, to go
Especially
even
Southern
more
California, right?
seriously about it, is I'm not, I'm more, I think of myself as a storyteller and not as somebody that has a message, even though everybody seems to think I have a message. So I really don't care about delivering that message at all. So I would have either no billboard or a blank billboard.
Nice.
And under $100, what I couldn't, or under, I think it would be this thing right here. I can't get by without a Starbucks coffee every day, or something to just keep me going.
Awesome.
Yeah, I'm sure I'll think of something else after we hang up, but I'll say one thing, Nate.
Yeah.
This a little tape recorder, or an iPhone with a recorder on it. I definitely am a huge believer of that for recording dreams and recording ideas when they pop into your head, so they don't go away. So
Do you
I
keep
really
that?
couldn't live without that.
Do you keep it at your bedside at night?
Actually, I don't, but I get up and I go out into the other room and get it. If I'm woken up by a dream, I don't keep it at the bedside because I'm charging it at another, in another location. I probably should. I don't have a plug there.
Well, there
But
might
yeah,
be
I
something
would
about the
certainly
act of walking
recommend
to go get it
anybody
too.
to keep it at their bedside.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. And I'm not a Starbucks guy, but so just so the world can know, what's the Steven Pressfield official Starbucks order? Venti, latte, tall, grande, whatever. How do you say it?
That's a great question. I'm going to embarrass myself. It's a venti white mocha.
Venti white mocha. Awesome.
Venti white
And I
mocha.
have well, for what it's worth, I have no idea what that means. So it can't be too bad, right?
Good. Keep it that way.
Yeah, right. Oh man, that's
Keep
so
it that
great.
way.
Steven,
Dunkin' Donuts black coffee.
yeah, well, my wife's from New England, Boston area, so yeah, that Dunkin' Donuts is a theme up there, like you wouldn't believe, man. They got that stuff running through their veins up there.
Yeah.
But anyway, listen, I won't take any more of your time. It's been such a pleasure to get to talk to you and to just to get to pick your brain a little bit, or even just be in your presence. This is such a marquee moment
Well,
for,
it's great hanging
me.
out with you.
Really
Great
appreciate
hanging
your
out
time.
with you too, Nate.
There's
Keep me
one
on
last
the list, and we'll do it again sometime.
Oh, don't say that, because I will start hounding Diana to make sure that happens if you're so kind enough to do that. There was one question. One question I've a buddy of mine presented to one of his podcast guests, and we'll wrap it up on this. I've wanted to start asking this to some of my guests as well. Especially in this world of social media, we're all kind of get our opinions fed back to us. Everything's like constant positive feedback, or that loop of what we assume to be true is already true, whatever. Is there something that you have changed your perspective on or your mind on over the last, particularly like over COVID and with all this crazy stuff going on? Is something that you've thought really strongly about one way and now have a different perspective on?
That's a great question. There's something certainly that I thought I was confident in, and that over this whole COVID thing in the last 4 or 5 years, I'm not confident in anymore. And this will probably get too political for everything, but I'm really I'm worried about the sanity of the American people. I used to feel like everybody was basically playing out of the same, deck of cards. And now we're playing out of 2 different decks of cards. And it's very scary to me. And I don't have any kind of an answer for it. I have no idea why it happened or what to do about it. But my mind has certainly changed on that subject over the last few years.
Yeah, that's a very good perspective. That I feel the same way. And it's kind of what's kind of driven me with some of this stuff is to make sure a lot of good things are getting put out there, a lot of positive things are getting put out there because there is so much of that negative stuff.
Yeah.
But what I will say though is in this world of social media that I feel like, because I have felt that exact same thing that you're feeling, that a lot of that is by design. And that as I look at my day-to-day life and I look at the people that I get to interact with day to day, the guys I see at my gym, the diversity of folks that I interact with in all walks of life, I realize that in reality, and the people that I see in my day-to-day, I can't speak to what everybody else. I can't speak to what's going on in a different state, a different part of the country or Canada or anything else, but where I'm at and what I'm dealing with, things are pretty darn good and people are pretty darn nice. And there's a lot of really good things going on in the world, a lot of respect, a lot of love out there. That's just not, because it's not sexy and it's not exciting. It's not getting broadcast out there, but it's definitely out there.
Yeah, I would agree with you. When I look at the people in my life, the same thing. People I see at the gym, my neighbors, it's a mystery to me because like almost everybody is a really good person. I can hardly think of anybody that I have any issues with at all, none at all. And then I read the paper, and I don't. It's really I don't know who's saying all that stuff.
Yeah.
So
well, it's this media has gotten crazy.
What you're doing and what I'm doing, we're trying to keep positive stuff out there and keep things that are helping people. That's what we're trying to do. And there's a lot of people trying to do that. A lot of good stuff out there. So
it's true.
Maybe it'll all turn out okay in the end.
I think so. Well, we'll wrap it up with this one last comment. That's a great compliment to you. During all of this, people like you in particular on your social media, and there's another guy, Rodney Smith Jr., who has a 50-yard challenge where he challenges young people, not just young men, but young people to mow 50 yards for others, for veterans. It started off for mowing for veterans, but through all of this pandemic, both he and you have been so reassuring and comforting for me, because you've stayed on message, you've stayed on point, you haven't gotten distracted by all the nonsense of everything that's going on out there, and you continue to drive home a positive message that's uplifting, that's motivating, and that's inspiring. And you haven't, and it's been easy for me to get sidetracked because you see all the crazy stuff going on there. You want to react to all this negativity and lash out and do dumb stuff, but like the consistent people, the people that are just sticking to their message and just sticking to their path, that those are the ones that they're so inspiring to me. And that's been you throughout this entire pandemic, all your series that you've been putting out there, all the Stoic stuff, even your book recommendations, like watching you put out book recommendations of a book I just recommended is just like, it just totally blows my ego up. So thank you.
Thanks a lot for that, Nate. And I'm sure that that's true of you too, that you're sticking to your guns and you're putting out the positive stuff and staying on message and not getting, called off into one of these rabbit holes, So
yeah.
God bless you. Keep it up.
We got a little sidetracked over the holidays. I've got a lot of personal mess going on in my life, but but that aside, I feel like I'm getting back on track and staying focused. And hey, guys like you to inspire me to keep doing it. That's what it's all about. So thank you. Really appreciate your time today, and I really appreciate your work, man.
All right. My pleasure, Nate. We'll do this again. Keep in touch. Okay.
I really appreciate it. I'm definitely holding you to that.
Okay.
Take care.
This episode is brought to you by Atlantic Custom Group. Atlantic Custom Group specializes in the unique and inspiring. For all your home repair and improvement needs, from custom libraries and millwork to tree houses and off-grid structures, Atlantic Custom Group can do it all. Renovate your kitchen, remodel your basement, or reinvent your entire home with Atlantic Custom Group. Call now for an appointment. 770-827-7591. Atlantic Custom Group, official sponsor of the Extraordinary Podcast.
So you're still here. Wow. Thanks for sticking around. So, what'd you think? What did I miss? What would you like to know more about? Who would you like to hear on the show? If you stuck around this long, maybe you won't mind giving me some feedback. And don't forget to check out the website, extraordinarypodcast.net, for all the latest episodes. And if you enjoyed the show, please take the time to share with your friends, on social media, or with anyone you think who might enjoy it. And last but not least, if you're ready to start living an extraordinary life, check out 8keystogreat.com, where you can craft your free blueprint to renovate your career, home, or lifestyle. The program is free, but you have to do the work to unlock each key. And finally, if you'd like to speak with me directly, you can book a free 30-minute Zoom call directly through my Calendly link on the contacts page. And in the meantime, check out some of the other exciting interviews with ordinary people living extraordinary lives. Thanks for listening, thanks for sharing, and most of all, thanks for just being you. I'm Nate G, and we'll see you next week.